Okay, welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar. Today we have Chris Yake, who is a Senior Project Manager in the TOD group at Metro, and he's going to talk today about the TOD strategic plan and some TOD in 3D. So, welcome.
All right, thank you, Kelly. So essentially what I'm going to get into today is I'm with Metro's TOD program, and we just finished, after a year, our TOD strategic plan. So I'm going to just go a little bit into the methodology that we use to develop the strategic plan, and then kind of some next steps. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with our program, we were created in 1998, so a little over 10 years old. We have a small budget of about almost $3 million a year. And basically our charge is to directly implement 2040, which is our regional growth plan. So, and we do that by directly investing in bricks and mortar and vertical development. So we partner with developers to help leverage TOD near our light rail station areas, streetcar, and then our frequent bus corridors. So this is all tied to transportation outcomes. We estimate that we've induced over 500,000 new transit trips by bringing people to the existing system. Our $30 million over the last 12 years has leveraged over $300 million in private investment. So this is a map to give you a sense of where our projects are. So we've got a few out in Hillsborough, couple in Beaverton, out in Gresham, we've done a lot of work. And then more recently, we've started doing more work in Portland. And that's primarily because, you know, the main thrust is really trying to push the market in our suburban communities, whereas Portland, inner Portland, needs a little less help. But now that we can invest in our frequent bus corridors, we're able to start looking at more areas in the inner core. So our results to date. So we have 20 built projects, 10 are in pre-development. A lot of projects come in and they kind of die on the vine. That's pretty standard. Over 2,000 housing units, and half of those have been affordable units. That's not by design. We're not an affordable housing program per se, but we do often partner with community development corporations and affordable housing builders. About 300 senior units. Many of our projects are mixed use. We don't require that, but if the market's right, then we like to see that ground floor retail. We have a couple institutional partners. We worked with Pacific University out in Hillsborough. We estimate that we've reduced greenhouse gas emissions by over 100,000 tons with our projects. We won a National APA Award for implementation in 2008. And again, we estimate that we've conservatively induced over 500,000 transit riders. And that's equated to $318 million in private investment. So why a strategic plan? So the primary impetus for this was when we started, and you'll see this in the next slide, there were relatively few areas that qualified for our funds because we just had East Side Max, which was the first line. But now we've added West Side, yellow, red, green, and now we can invest in our frequent bus corridors. But our money has essentially remained the same. So we really had to be, especially when the market turns around, we had to prepare ourselves to be able to say no to some areas because there's just not enough money to go around. So we want to be very targeted in terms of our investment so we can best catalyze private investment. So here you see when we started, this is our funding level. It's grown, yeah, but in terms of eligible areas, it's just metastasized, so we couldn't keep up. So we wanted to develop a typology that was unique to the Portland region and unique to our program, because we're very much interested in near-term results. We want our investment to help catalyze private investment so it doesn't need subsidy anymore. So we have this what we're calling transit orientation score, which is looking at the built environment, existing densities, ped bike access. But then also the other half of the equation is market strength, because we really want to invest in areas that have some market potential. So we don't invest in a project that just sits there by itself, not attracting any other projects around it for 10 years. So I'll get into how we did this as well. So when we started thinking about this transit orientation score, we started with the traditional trinity of TOD, and those are the 3 Ds: density, diversity, and design. And then people have been piling on over the years, more Ds, demographics, distinction, how do you characterize TOD? But we want to be different, so we came up with 5 Ps. People, places, ped bike, performance, and physical form. And again, but at the heart of this is that potential, that market potential. So by people, we mean, it's essentially density, but it's residents and employees within an area. Places, this is kind of our diversity component. This is neighborhoods serving retail and services. Ped bike connectivity, this is access to sidewalks and then low-stress bikeways. For instance, we didn't include bike lanes because especially if you go out in the suburban communities, there are bike lanes on big arterials, and we didn't really count that as bicycle-friendly. Performance, this is basically frequencies of bus and rail. It's really hard to build a transit lifestyle if you don't have multiple connections via MAX and bus. Physical form, this we really focused on the block structure. Where you see smaller blocks, you have better connectivity, and you're more likely to see more urban style development. So then we were able to plot these out for each of our station areas, the 5 Ps. So this is all half-mile station areas. This is Hollywood. So it shows good balance of all the Ps. Some people question why the places is low. And if you think about it, half the station area is Laurelhurst, which is low-density single-family residential. And then also you have the Banfield running through it, so that takes up a lot of space. Beaverton Central, a lot of people are surprised about the places for here. It actually demonstrates the highest number of retail and services of all of our station areas. But it really lacks that physical form, so when you go to downtown Beaverton, you're like, well, where is downtown Beaverton? Because it's so bisected by state highways. But really, there is a strong critical mass of places there. We just have to figure out a way to connect them. Here's Gresham Central. Again, our historic downtowns performed pretty well just because the nature of how they were built. Hillsborough Central, again, pretty strong balance, but it is underserved a little bit. This is a great example of an equity issue. Here's Lentz. It's got really strong pedestrian connections. It's got a good physical form, a lot of thick block structure there, but yet it's underserved by retail and services. Gateway, no surprise, has great performance because it's a transit center and you have 3 MAX lines running through it. But really, it's so suburban in nature, it underperforms in all the other areas. Clackamas, this is a mall. And you see that because there's virtually no block structure there. But it actually shows the highest density of all of our station areas, and this is outside of downtown. We just threw that out because it's off the charts. But Clackamas has a lot of people because you have a lot of retail employment and you have a medical center down there. So you have great density, but we're really not tapping into that. Rockwood, this is out in East Portland and West Gresham. Again, you have pretty good densities. There's a lot of apartments out there, but again, it's underserved by places and has a very suburban format. So when we rasterized these and made a composite of the 5 Ps, this is what you see across the region. So the blue areas show a high level of transit orientation, and then that goes down to what we're calling transit adjacent. These are areas that really are lacking in one or all of the P's. So you see, no surprise, downtown Portland's one big TOD. And then you've got out here, this is Hillsborough. This is actually Forest Grove. This is Orenco Station, Beaverton. Lake Oswego does pretty well. This is Sellwood. St. John's is strong. And you can almost see our old streetcar corridors. This is Sandy. I believe this is Division. And then you see downtown Gresham out here. So I use this map quite a bit at the start of the project.
Where is Oregon City on there?
Oregon City's right here.
Okay.
And actually this is Lake Oswego, sorry.
Yeah, okay. More like
So I showed this map quite a bit early in the process, but people were saying, well, my area is blue. Why aren't I at the top of the list? So I decided to basically elevate things so you'd really see the magnitude differences here. So this is that basically extruded using a z value. So here you see much greater levels of differentiation. Lake Oswego's looks good, but it's just nothing compared to downtown Portland and the inner east side portions of North Portland. Here you see Gresham out here. These are the station areas, the green line, not a lot of blue. East Side Max, not a lot of blue. So this is really our challenge over the next 50 years.
I'm surprised that Oregon City has more than Lake Oswego, at least from the appearances on that map.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon City, remember, was essentially our first city, and it was going to be the Portland. But it's got a really strong downtown, good block structure, pretty good transit service with frequent bus. There's some places there. So it's got the bones of good TOD. So this is a view looking from the west. So here you see this is Hillsborough and its stations. Right here, this is Intel. So that's why this is so high, but it's not within the station area. So that's one of our struggles out on the west side. I think this one's Nike. That's probably why that's high. I mean, here's a whole area. This is Tannisbourne, Amber Glen, I believe, and it's nowhere near transit. Here's looking from the south. This is Lake Oswego. Then you'll see these pockets, old streetcar neighborhoods. Like this is Woodstock down in southeast. So this is going to be the new Milwaukee line. Sellwood is very strong, but the station areas are kind of at that periphery. Here you have downtown Milwaukee, and the station's going to be at the south end of that. Here's Clackamas out here. So this is Sunnyside Medical Center. There's a lot of people, good transit service. This is our future southwest corridor, since we've already started working with our corridors group. Because we're really, with this next corridor, we're trying to have the land use lead. Rather than draw lines on the map, we really want to see where those station areas are best situated and then draw the alignment. So this is Barber through here. This is downtown Tigard. Let's see, in here. And this is Sherwood down here. So where might those station areas fall if we're going to try to connect the dots? So these are eligible areas. Again, our station areas are half mile. Our frequent bus corridors, we're able to invest in any projects within 800 feet of a frequent bus corridor. So we have pretty good coverage across the region. So then it's really handy when you focus in. When a developer comes in with a project, we're able to look and pinpoint where that is. This is downtown Hillsborough. So if a project's in the middle of the blue, it's going to be a strong project, and we're more likely to invest there. And then you see it dive down into the single-family neighborhoods. This is Clackamas. So this is the mall. Sunnyside is down here. So this is the mall is high, Sunnyside is hot, the station not so much. But making those connections is, again, our challenge. This is a Renko station. This is a really good example of how the alignment is not quite where it should be. So the station is down here, and the blue is up here. But that's changing because they're doing a lot of infill kind of in the middle. This is the southwest corridor. So again, maybe potential station areas where you see the blue, downtown Tigard. This is Bridgeport Village down here. You know, how can we make that connection? This is Washington Square area up here. So basically what we did was we developed a scatter plot. So on the vertical axis, that's that transit orientation score, that composite. And then on the bottom is that retail market strength. And we measured this by building sales per square foot, which is a good proxy for once you reach certain pricing levels, then higher density mixed use development starts to make sense. So I plotted this because you see how downtown and Northwest is just kind of off the chart. So we focused on in our suburban areas. That's not to say we can't invest in downtown and Northwest. In fact, College Station, which is the new student housing going in, where the green and yellow line turn around, we invested in that project. We recently invested in a project up in Northwest near a streetcar that's going to provide workforce housing. So we can, but it has to be extraordinary circumstances, and we really want to focus on the outer areas that need a little more help. So those are our station areas, and you see, you know, they're color-coded by line, but you see that there's a pretty good correlation between transit orientation and retail market strength, or real estate market strength.
Was that the Ramona that you invested in?
No.
No.
So this is how we developed our clusters, investment clusters. And I'll get into those a bit. But basically, you know, this is that upper tier. So they have both strong transit orientation and a stronger market. Then you've got that cross section. It's got a blend of the two. And then this lower tier, you know, is really struggling either from a transit orientation perspective or from a market perspective. And again, that correlation, you'll note there's nothing in here. No stations fall within here, where there's poor urban form and a strong market. So it really kind of supports our hypothesis. So this first area we're calling our plan and partner areas. So, and you see it all across the region. You know, a lot of the west side stations, a lot of the east side stations, Green Line. These are areas that are probably more suburban in format, or just really don't have the market to support TOD. Our middle section we're calling catalyze and connect. These are areas that traditionally, this is probably our sweet spot, where if we do invest in a project, give it a little nudge, then the market might come along. So you start to, across the region, it's a little closer in, you know, you start to pick up, you know, downtown Gresham, downtown Hillsborough, some of our closer in bus segments. And then last, we have our infill and enhance. These are the areas that really are performing well for being suburban in nature. And these are, the orange are the future Milwaukee stations. So that's inner southeast Portland, so that's no surprise. You know, this is Hollywood. And you can look online. Our strategic plan is now published on our website. So if you want the 90-page document that really goes in the details, you can find that there. So here, I mean, virtually everything is closer in. All the inner yellow line stations, downtown Beaverton, this is downtown Gresham. And all the bus segments are close in. So developing this typology, we've been able to go from this, where essentially our program treated every area equally. If a project came in, we couldn't really say no. Even though we knew if we invested in it, it wasn't going to really catalyze any development because the market wasn't there, the urban form wasn't there, we just couldn't say no. So now we go from this to this. So we can hand this out to developers and really help guide their decisions and let them know up front where we're most likely to invest. And that's basically the infill and enhance. We want to see, we really want to see them pushing the market because we know that it's a transit-rich environment. It's got an emerging market. So we want to see really high densities, maybe workforce housing, maybe affordable housing, what we're calling prototypical projects. Then the catalyze and connect, if they are pushing the market, we don't expect them to, be doing 100 units the acre. But if the market is providing townhomes at 12 units the acre, and a project comes in with 30 units the acre, yeah, that's not a lot for downtown Portland, but for those suburban contexts, that's really changing the urban form. So, and then the plan and partner, those are areas that it's just probably too early, that maybe those are good areas for station area planning, to apply for TGM grants, which are grants the state provides for planning. Look at some of those missing PED connections. How can we get these areas ready for investment?
So I realize that so many of our rail lines were built kind of very close to freeways or along the freeways and all. So, the answer to this is probably no, but I'm just wondering, is there, in your measurements, is there any negative aspect for building housing, next to the freeway, for example? I mean, where I would hate to live, but, and I think a lot of people would, just because of the noise and air pollution factors and all. But was that taken into account at all in this tool?
No, I mean, it would be a case-by-case basis. So you do see some projects, for instance, on the East Side Max at the Northeast 60th station. The Center Commons project was one of our projects, and it's right up against the band field. Now, that was one of our earlier projects, and it was designed for senior housing. I don't know if they thought that they wouldn't be able to hear all the noise, but it ended up filling up with not seniors, with younger professionals. I'm sure they put a fair amount of, they looked into the noise effects, and I'm sure the windows are thicker. But no, we wouldn't want to promote that. But if it's a great project and it's right next to transit, it's an opportunity that we shouldn't pass up. So that's all I have. I might just rest here on this slide for talking purposes. And if you do have a question, push your little button in the front so it can be recorded.
Yeah, and if your mic doesn't work, yell at me and I will bring you one.
Jeff.
For an area such as the Southwest Corridor, I'm thinking of maybe like West Commuter Rail or some things that might emerge in the future to increase frequency. How easy is this strategy to update as land use does change? Is it something that you might do once a year, or can you speak to anything like that, like an emerging corridor?
We actually, so we have all the data, and we can probably, at the bare minimum, we'll update it every 5 years with the RTP cycle. But if an area is changing very quickly, and good examples of that would be, Ranco. It already qualifies, though, so we don't really have to worry about updating the data. But like Tanasbourne and Amber Glen, which is in here, it's really changing quickly. Now, again, we can't invest there quite yet because there's not really good transit service. But we could update that data, on the fly, and it wouldn't take long at all. So I think at the short end, we'll do it every 2 years. And at the long end, maybe every 5 years. Alan.
What was your vetting process for the 5 Ps? How did it get developed, and was there any pushback?
No pushback, but people wanted to pile on. They started coming up with more Ps. They wanted politics, they wanted policy, they wanted planning. But we really wanted it, when we did the HCT process to identify future transit corridors, I think we ended up with 45 criteria. and most everything overlapped with ridership. So our take was, why have 100 criteria when really we can boil it down and simplify it to the kind of the key components. So we settled on the 5 Ps because there's a lot of research out there about transit ridership and block structure, connectivity. So we kind of linked it to that. We're not professing to say that it's a predictor of ridership. We just feel it's the best blend that you want to see on the ground before you invest in TOD. We might, when we update it, maybe we'll add some Ps, but we'll see. Yeah.
For the 5 Ps, how much influence would the actual development have on the people and places? Would those ones be less important if they could be addressed by the actual development?
So wait, you're saying the project itself, does it change the Ps?
Oh, well, if it was high in the pedestrian connectivity and the traditional grid network, could you add the people and places with the development?
Right, and that's the beauty of, I'll try to get back to these radar charts, is we can really sit down with our local partners and developers and see, what do these areas lack? Sorry about this. Okay, so clearly Clackamas lacks something, and that's a block structure. Although some people have argued, well, you can walk through them all, and so maybe we should call those streets. And it's actually kind of a pleasant walk. But, in Clackamas, we would love, if a project came in, we'd love to see if, depending on where it's situated, can they add a PED connection through that area? Now, we can't require that, per se, as part of our projects. Our projects have conditions, so our money is essentially protected over a 30-year span. So, is that some... Oh, it's gone now. Okay. So, we actually buy an easement from the developer. So, a conservation easement, you're paying someone not to build. We're paying them to build at a higher level because we recognize the cost premiums associated with higher densities. Structured parking, if that's in place, elevators, more sophisticated fire systems. We want to help overcome those cost premiums. So we get an easement, and so for 30 years, they can't tear down their mixed-use development and put in a car wash. We haven't had to worry about that so far, and I doubt we ever will. But basically, we're protecting our investment in the TOD. So as part of that agreement, we can have some conditions. So if they say they're going to build 90 units, they have to build 90 units. If they say they're not going to provide any parking, we want that as a condition. So sometimes we try to stick to density, parking, maybe ground floor retail in our conditions, just because development is flexible and things come up and maybe they'll change some design features. So we try not to over-design the project. So I'm not sure if we would condition a pedestrian connection, but we could if we wanted to. Yep.
Is there any likelihood or chance in the future that Metro with the TOD organization could team up with other public organizations, maybe focus on something like PDC, urban renewal areas, or other things where you can kind of combine funds and incentives?
Yeah, that's why we're calling it plan and partner. So basically really to try to foster relationships. Many of our projects have been with PDC. They're throwing a lot more money at a project, but at least we're adding to it. We're really trying to promote urban renewal areas in our suburban communities because those are the ones that are really struggling to pay for the infrastructure. And that, it's just good business to help leverage other people's money. And so that's, moving forward, we always kind of want to see that. City of Gresham, recently we had a project that they really stepped up and, they reduced their parking requirements. They waived some fees. So it really helps the project move forward when we have that local support. In the back?
Hi, yeah. Is there an element to the strategy to ensure that as you're accepting projects, you get a mix of housing that's going to serve a variety of income levels?
We don't have a direct requirement. We've only had one condo project. So, even our projects that weren't affordable, or at least their market rate, and they're probably workforce housing. The one up in Northwest, we never would have partnered on that project if it was high-end condos. But the fact that, they had all those condo conversions up there, and that used to be where 20-somethings would move when they moved to Portland. But now it's become so unattainable, and so for him to provide, small units, 500 to 600 square feet, studios and one bedrooms, it was really filling a market need up there. Because it's too bad. You have great transit, you can walk everywhere, and yet all those younger people were being pushed out by those condo conversions. So that was nice to see. They've definitely brought up the equity issue. Should we be incorporating that? I think although we don't technically require affordable housing, we always push for a mix of incomes. Because there's other areas, for instance, on the east side Max. And I worked on a project out there with Alan a few years back. And one of the issues out there is they have the reverse problem. They have basically an over-concentration of affordable housing and low-income housing. So there, we're actually able to say no if it's an affordable housing project and really try to promote market rate so we have a better balance of incomes in those areas. Done.
Taking the example you have up there at Clackamas, and you're talking generally about private development.
Yep.
How about funding infrastructure as part of a pure infrastructure project rather than simply a building project?
And that is a great point because so we're the MPO. Other MPOs have TOD programs, but they can't invest in the vertical development, but they can invest in the infrastructure. So they lay the groundwork for private investment. To date, we can't technically invest in infrastructure. And so we actually, I don't know when reauthorization's ever going to happen, but when there was a request out for earmarks, we actually put together a quick application for a connectivity program so that we would have a small pot of money to invest in infrastructure rather than just vertical.
Right. But as part of a private development parcel, let's say a mall, and that's part of the gap that you would provide them. You would provide the gap of building the roads, and that would lessen the overall development costs of a project.
And we can kind of do that because we don't really care. Once we approve a project, we don't have to have receipts for what they're using our money for. So if we don't require the money has to go towards their structured parking or bike parking. So it kind of just goes into the pot. So it might help, even though infrastructure is so off the chart expensive though, at least it helps cover some of those costs if they're incorporated in the project. Yep.
I'm a little confused of the purpose. Seems to serve a cross purpose for the MPO and TriMet. And that has to do with another P that you don't have up there as parking. Is wherever there's major parking facilities developed, you've diminished the opportunity for TOD development. I give an example of Sunset Transit Center. That was originally designed to serve a community called Peter Court Village. That was completely lost when they built a multi-story parking structure there. It's now a wasteland. And I could give you other examples. Clackamas Town Center, huge parking facility. They want to build big parking facilities for the Milwaukee Light Rail. Gateway always had parking as a buffer between opportunity for development. So it seems that the transit agency and Metro are working against your objectives of developing TOD development.
Mm-hmm. And we're actually working more and more. Our program used to be pretty isolated, and we just did our little projects over here, and we didn't really interact with other agencies or departments. But in recent years, we've really become more engaged in the actual alternatives analysis looking at the stations before they're built to try to overcome those issues. So the parking, if it's located there, it doesn't have to be right next to the station. And I think there's going to be, hopefully with Barber, we'll set a new precedent for looking at that. On the good note is Milwaukee, the good thing about not having enough money is now they're not doing a structure at Tacoma because they can't afford it. And then they reduced the structure size down at the terminal station down at Park Avenue. So Tacoma, that's a good example because they're going to do a surface lot that we'll be able to hopefully one day harvest or redevelop that lot. Whereas the structured parking, you're right, once it's there, it's not going away.
I just followed up on the original design of Max, which I had been involved with. The idea of park and ride was as a land bank for development. Mm-hmm. Once you start putting structured parking in, that whole concept is lost.
And the other good note is I came from the city of Denver where we were building the fast track system. And there we were building 20,000 parking spaces adjacent to stations. It's just a completely different mentality. And then to come here to find out that TriMet will not allow park and rides essentially within 5 miles of the CBD. So I think we're progressive, but you're also right. We've made some strategic errors over the years. Yep.
How are the existing developments, how you've done the 20 developments that you've worked on, how are they in terms of vacancies for both the commercial and residential aspects of the buildings?
The residential do very well. For instance, out in Gresham, the Gresham Crossings project, which is adjacent to the new Civic Drive station, that one has a waiting list, and it has for several years. Plus, it's renting at a 35% premium for the Gresham market. So it really shows that there is a latent demand for higher quality urban style housing in Gresham. On the flip side, the same building, the retail is virtually all vacant. So, since I've come on board, I come from kind of an urban economics perspective, and you just can't put retail everywhere. And I think jurisdictions are catching on to that and recognizing that. Light rail is not going to support a coffee shop even by itself. It really needs that critical mass of housing nearby, and it does, in some cases, need some vehicular traffic moving by to help support those uses. So I think for now, even the project up in Northwest, we didn't require ground floor retail. And that's Northwest, the most dense part of the city, because it wasn't a retail street. It didn't make sense. So I think we're being more pragmatic now. The trick is, well, how do you activate that ground floor? How do you make it ped-friendly if there's no active use? And so that's something that we're going to try to think through with some designers and projects over the years. Yeah.
Well, a couple of things. I'm just wondering if you can share with us, for those of us who know Northwest, where that particular project you referred to is, but my more basic question is about Oregon City. I brought it up earlier just to find out, well, I did a project with Oregon City last year to try to get them high-capacity transit. They're the only regional center in the area that does not have high-capacity transit. And, I'm kind of wondering why Barber Boulevard gets precedence over Oregon City in getting high-capacity transit when, Oregon City has done a lot of policy stuff to try to get good development there. Mm-hmm. And I think, the having a station there would certainly be the catalyst that it needed. But, I guess my most basic question is, in this particular development climate, are you continuing to even get applications that, well, aren't we starting to run out, I guess, because a lot of things were approved a while back and maybe had funding a while back, but, as far as I can see, banks are still not loaning, and, maybe some places are getting financing from pension funds and insurance companies and such. But can you speak to those three issues?
Well, first for Oregon City, it's now not the only regional center that's not connected, because now we have Amber Glen Tanasbourne, which is going to become a regional center. And that, I helped out with HCT plan, but I wasn't the project manager. I think there's a lot of politics that go into it, but also they really did a hard technical analysis, and Barber and Powell were the highest performing from a ridership perspective, and it kind of across the criteria. And I think
read the technical analysis.
I think those came to the top. And if you look at a map too, I mean, that's the one quadrant that's kind of underserved. So again, I wasn't privy to all those discussions, but I can only speculate. As for the investment climate, things are getting better. We're having more developers come in the door. They're not quite there in terms of the financing, but they're getting close. I've had 2 projects that have gotten, I believe, 70, 80% from the banks, and so it's starting to open up slowly but surely. And we're finding most of the projects are closer in Portland, so that's why we've had to re-emphasize the closer in areas, but still support our suburban communities. Yep.
Thanks, Chris. We have, as you know, we are feeding this over the web, and we have some students who have written in with some questions. So we have one student who's kind of curious about the mathematics behind what you presented. And so it's a multi-part question. That's why I'm prefacing this. Okay. The first part of this was, what are the quantities involved in the 5 Ps? Are they percentiles? Or what values are being represented? And then how are these combined into a single score? How did you take into account different scales of measurement and aggregation and so forth? And then she's also curious as to what the size of the raster was used to overlay and generate the scores.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, first, so the raster size, we used 260-foot by 260-foot grid cells. And basically, because that's a good proxy for the Portland block, 200 feet plus 30 feet of right-of-way. So we used that. So then we did a quarter-mile kernel distance from each grid cell. So it went out and found out the density, why does this feedback, of people, all places, the sidewalk, all the Ps. It went out and looked a quarter mile from that grid cell and then got an average and assigned that value toward that grid cell. So then we took all the scores, the composite scores for the geographies, and basically added them up. And they weren't the same scale. So basically then I pulled it into Excel where I indexed each on a scale of 1 to 100. So for instance, Clinton area, which is in inner southeast, a future Portland and Milwaukee station area, had the highest level of blocks. So that became my 100. So that was the best. And so everything was compared back to Clinton because that was number 1. And so for each category, there was a number 1. Clackamas was highest in density. So everything was related back to that. Rather than comparing everything to downtown Portland, which just would have been unfair, we compared everything to the highest performing suburban station area or frequent bus corridor. Did that answer all 3 of those?
Yeah, I think so. Just out of curiosity, what software did you use to do the sort of 3D projections that look like the mountains?
ArcScene, and it's usually if you have ArcMap, then you can just pull it into there. Okay. Jeff.
Since this tool is very heavily for developers, what has been their reaction so far to looking at this sort of increased level of your aim to invest in their properties? Has it been positive so far?
Very positive, because for them, developers are all about certainty, and if they see that the area is blue, whether it be catalyzing, connector, infill, and enhance, they know that they'll probably get our money. And so that's always a good thing for them. And then we're also hoping it helps guide them, because we get a lot of projects in areas that just are not ripe for investment, and it's hard to say no. And so this will help focus their attention on which areas and maybe give them ideas for other areas that might be ripe. Yeah.
I'm assuming that for these projects that the zoning would need to be changed, and I was wondering what your role as a organization is in changing the zoning and how you're related to that aspect of the projects.
Actually, City of Portland especially, they've done their zoning changes in most of their station areas, and so it really does allow for transit-oriented uses. It's completely the opposite in Denver, where I came from, where we had to literally go through every area, and it was just a battle. So here it's nice because a lot of that upfront work's been done. Portland and Milwaukee hasn't been done, so that's going to be a challenge. But most cases it's entitled. Very rarely do they have to go in for a zone change. In some cases, the comp plan designation will be correct. And as long as they're consistent with the comp plan, a zoning change becomes a lot easier. Suburban communities, that's a different story. For instance, we have a project in downtown Hillsborough right now that really, it's a go, no-go depending on a zoning change. And so, but we have great local partners, and we really try to foster those relationships to work with that and really point out, your zoning code is broken and it's not supporting TOD. So I think they're receptive to that, and they understand that. Yep.
What is the criteria by which good block structure is determined? What goes against it? What goes for it?
So basically, the small is good. Smaller the better. And there's really good research that was done about average block size and transit ridership, and they found in areas where the block size was less than 3 acres in size, average, transit ridership was around 60% mode split. And then dropping down to like 6 acres per block, it drops down to about 30%, and then over 12 acres, in average, it's below 10%. So we kind of latched on to that good research. In Portland, we're blessed because in many close-in areas, every block is actually less than an acre in size, so it really helps the average. Yep.
Yeah. If a student wanted to get involved in transit-oriented development, either with Metro or one of the jurisdictions, or even with a developer and all, are there things you can recommend to them for, in terms of how they should prepare in their education?
I would really promote taking some real estate classes, and then, obviously most of you are taking transportation classes, but it's really helped me over the years to be able to speak the same language, especially dealing with engineers on transit projects. If you can appreciate their perspective and understand their approach to things, it really helps. Because I find a lot of planners are kind of whiny, and they're always complaining about engineering decisions or market decisions, but they can't speak that language, and they can't back up what they do with numbers. So I've always tried to be very pragmatic, always support my case with research if possible. And so then I think they'll be much more responsive to that. And to really understand the development side of the equation. That, for instance, design review is pretty common throughout the city, but that comes at a cost. It's added cost to the developer. So in many cases, you're not going to get anything if you impose too much upon that developer. Some projects can die in design review because it just adds too much and they just have to walk away from it. So whereas it's good, it serves a purpose, we have to be very careful in balancing the amount of restrictions if we want to see good development. So project? Oh, here.
For other questions from the web is, when prioritizing TOD investments, how much does consumer demand for transit factor in, and do you differentiate between demand for bus versus light rail?
We didn't really do a demand analysis. We had the performance P because we really wanted to see areas that have not only really good frequencies for trains, but also bus. So that means you can go east-west, you can go north-south, you can get to multiple destinations. You know, I always think of when I've been to DC or other areas, no one carries a schedule. You don't need a schedule. You just go down to the station, you know another train's coming. And so I think it's that type of service that you're able to build a transit lifestyle out of. And when you have that redundancy, that density of service, you're going to really see really good mode splits. We don't spend a lot of money studying our projects and how they perform afterwards, but we have a little. And Jennifer Dill actually helped us out look at survey some of our projects. And one up off Grand, close to Max in the convention center, close to really good bus service. So we estimated when we evaluated that project that they would have about an 18% transit mode split. While looking back a couple years, they're at about 30% mode split, plus 20% of their trips were walking and biking. So we're really conservative with how we evaluate our projects from a transit perspective, but all of them seem to be doing very well. And even it's not all self-selection too. We found people that just moved there because they moved there, they didn't really think about transit. They transferred many of their trips to walking, biking, and transit.
Chris, I'm going to push back on you on a little bit what you just said about increasing costs with design review. Mm-hmm. And I think that to a degree that's true. If you don't have predictability in the sense that you don't have good design review, you don't have good process, and because we find as we develop projects around the country, you get good developers where you've got good clear and concise regulations in a process because you want to know predictability. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to invest millions of dollars in a project, I want to know my neighbor is going to have the same rigor in quality and compliance. So in a sense, I think it's a little dangerous to say that a design review adds costs. I think that there's a cost that's worthy to add to a project. And if you look at downtown Portland, for example, it's got probably the most regulations of the entire region. You look at your map, where's the density there? It's part of that. So it's an issue to concern, but I would be cautious of saying it will discourage projects. So just a comment.
Yeah. Oh, and I agree. Design review is very important in particular areas. But we did have one project that added $400,000 to their project because the neighborhood wanted certain changes in materials. And really, if you looked at the before and after, it did not make a profound difference. And so essentially, our money ended up funding that change in material. So rather than supporting, bike parking or structured parking, it basically funded their design review changes. So yes, it's a balancing act.
I would say that's a product of a poor design review process where they didn't prioritize what was important as part of the process. If you look at a City of Portland project, it wouldn't be defined that way, where it's a he said, she said process, but Portland's design review would say quality, durable, ground form materials. Yep. And the developer has multiple ways of doing that. So, I chalk it up to the jurisdiction not having a very good set of design review regulations.
And that's the key. I mean, clear and objective design review standards are really critical.
And a process, which doesn't add time or difficulty, because that's the bigger issue.
Right. Other questions? Oh.
I've got one more from the web. This person is interested in knowing if you could elaborate on any TOD efforts related to developing the East Side streetcar loop, the MLK Grand Corridor in particular.
We've had a couple developers come in with interest. We just actually approved a project last week that's on 6th and Cooch. And so that, really it was the streetcar that made that developer basically move forward with his project. So I think it's starting to happen, but East Side Loop is going to be fascinating because this is the first time we're getting outside of the core. And everyone keeps on citing the studies about how streetcars leveraged all this investment. I think East Side Loop is going to be, it's going to be an awakening, and hopefully, I think we'll see positive impacts but not nearly as profound as we saw on the west side. And part of it, I don't think the placemaking elements that were done in the Pearl and other parts of the streetcar on the west side, we don't really have that on the east side. They haven't invested a ton into bike facilities or streetscape enhancements. So I think that's part. It's a whole package. You know, the streetcar did not cause the Pearl. It was just one piece in the puzzle. Yep.
On a related note, how do you view the Lake Oswego proposed line for streetcar?
From what perspective? Whether that's a tricky one. So it did receive approval from City of Lake Oswego and City of Portland. I think they're kind of in a holding pattern now as a project. I mean, we have the alignment, which really helps from a cost perspective, and we can count that towards our local match, which is really helpful. I mean, Lake Oswego was an interurban town that grew up around rail, and so it's basically just going back and making that connection yet again. I think a lot of it's really key, the foothills area in Lake Oswego, which is underdeveloped, and that's a key redevelopment opportunity. And I think once you start, if that happens and you build that critical mass down at the south end, it starts to make a lot more sense.
Just another, I think what you're doing is really good because it really starts, starts developing a rationale for why one project gets one over the other. Mm-hmm. The other issue is from just an economic standpoint. So, for example, if it's an urban renewal district, when we do projects and we talk about investment of public dollars, we talk about them having to leverage considerable amount of private dollars. So typically, urban renewal districts like to see a return of private investment of $7 for every public dollar spent. Do you have any sort of metrics like that you say, you know, for us to make some financial sense, we need to see this much return on investment for the money we're investing in it? Is it a unit count? Is it a dollar amount? Is it something in it? And then if you were to look at two projects that might be worthy, would that be a determinant that you would use to choose one over the other?
We actually have a lot of metrics, and you might have missed the upfront slides, but so far over 12 years we've devoted $30 million in funds, and we've helped leverage $318 million in private investment. So, you know, 1 to 10 is a pretty good return. But then also, so that typology, that's just the first sieve that a project has to go through. So if it's an infill and enhanced catalyzing connect, it qualifies. But then we have to figure out, well, how much does it qualify for? So then we do an evaluation of the induced transit ridership. And by that we mean we're comparing what the market would do without any help, which oftentimes is like townhomes at 12 units the acre. And if this project's proposing 30 units the acre, we have a delta there. And basically we apply a mode split to figure out how many new riders we're bringing to the system. So that gives us a cost per induced rider, our investment port. And so that's usually at about, it's pretty cheap. I mean, it's like $1 to $2 per induced rider. So that's another key measure that we would compare projects. Rarely, though, we accept projects on a rolling basis, so rarely do we have to compare projects to each other, and they don't really compete. So we found that we're pretty effective. You know, a new transit line is, you know, at least its cost per induced rider is huge. And so for us coming in at about $1 is pretty effective.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time.
Okay.
So let's thank Chris for a pretty informative discussion here today. I just want to remind you, if you're taking the class, please sign in and leave your question. And a plug for next week, we have some of our own here. Margaret Neal, Arlie Atkins, and Gretchen Lohr are going to be talking about demonstrating the benefits of green streets for active aging. So see you next week.